Number 25. Salt pork and beans. This was the undisputed king of deep trail calories. Pioneers would soak rock-hard dried beans overnight in river water, then seal them inside a cast-iron Dutch oven with heavy slabs of salt pork. Buried in hot coals overnight, the fat from the pork would slowly render down, coating every single bean in rich, dense energy. It was heavy, highly portable, and gave a man the stamina to walk 15 miles beside a lumbering ox. Number 24. Hardtack skillet. Hardtack was a military-grade biscuit made of just flour and water, baked until all moisture vanished. They were literally as hard as stones and could shatter a tooth if bitten directly. To survive this, pioneers would smash the biscuits with a hammer, throw the shards into a smoking skillet of bubbling bacon grease, and fry them until they softened enough to chew. It was pure, unadulterated carbohydrate and fat. Number 23. Fried cornmeal mush. Nothing was ever wasted on the trail. If a mother made cornmeal mush for breakfast, whatever stuck to the bottom of the pot was meticulously scraped out, packed into a tin, and left to cool. By supper, this gelatinous block was sliced thick and fried in pure lard until the edges crisped up. This was calorie recycling at its finest. Number 22. Sourdough flapjacks. Flour spoils, but fermented dough survives. Pioneer women kept a sourdough starter, often called a mother, in a sealed crock. This living culture of wild yeast was guarded with their lives, sometimes even slept with under blankets to keep it from freezing during bitter prairie nights. Cooked on a flat iron skillet, these dense, sour flapjacks provided the essential gut-healthy bacteria needed to fight off trail-borne illnesses. Number 21. Wild onion and forage greens hash. Scurvy was a silent killer on the plains. To combat bleeding gums and rotting teeth, children were sent walking ahead of the wagons to forage wild onions, dandelions, and prairie turnips. These bitter, fibrous weeds were chopped roughly and thrown into a hash with whatever animal fat was available. They did not eat it for the flavor, but rather because it kept their cells from falling apart. Number 20. Pot liquor soup. Here is what nobody talks about regarding trail cooking. When you boil salted meat or bitter greens, the leftover water is a cloudy, murky broth called pot liquor. A pioneer woman never dumped this water out. It was a nutrient-dense elixir packed with leached vitamins and suspended animal fat. That exact same liquid would be kept over the fire for days, serving as the base for endless cycles of trail soup. Number 19. Ash cake. It was not a recipe, it was a declaration. When the skillets were packed away or in use, pioneer men would mix water, salt, and cornmeal into a stiff dough. They would scrape away the burning buffalo chips, lay the bare dough directly onto the glowing white ashes, and cover it back up. The intense heat baked the bread instantly, creating a thick crust of ash and char that was simply brushed off against a pant leg before eating. Here is where things get uncomfortable. Modern food companies want you to believe that cooking requires precision, pristine stainless steel, and a pantry full of single-use ingredients. We look at dirt and ash as contamination, but the pioneers knew that a little ash was just carbon and a little dirt was just minerals. The fire sanitized everything. And survival meant abandoning the luxury of disgust to build a stronger stomach. Number 18. Vinegar pie. What do you do when your children are crying for a treat, but you have not seen a fresh apple or berry in 3 months? You use the mathematics of hunger. Pioneer women would take apple cider vinegar, mix it with a precious handful of sugar, butter, and flour, and bake it in a crude lard crust. The sharp acid of the vinegar transformed under the heat, mimicking the tartness of lemons or green apples. It was an illusion, but on the brutal trail, an illusion of home was enough to keep going. Number 17. Buffalo pemmican stew. When Native Americans traded with wagon trains, they offered pemmican, the ultimate survival superfood, made from sun-dried buffalo meat pounded into powder. Mixed with rendered tallow and studded with dried wild berries, a block of pemmican could last for years without rotting. Pioneers would hack off chunks with an axe and boil it in river water to melt the fat, rehydrate the meat, and release a tart, life-saving burst of energy. Number 16. Coffee boiled with crushed eggshells. Coffee on the trail was a coarse, bitter sludge, often stretched with roasted chicory or scorched barley to make the beans last. To make this acidic brew drinkable, pioneers would save their extremely rare eggshells, crush them into fragments, and boil them directly with the coffee grounds. The calcium carbonate in the shells neutralized the acid and forced the muddy grounds to settle at the bottom of the tin pot. Number 15. Saleratus biscuits. Before commercial baking powder existed, pioneers gathered chunks of saleratus, a naturally occurring crude baking soda from dry alkaline lake beds along the trail in Wyoming. It was harsh, tasted slightly of soap, and left a yellow tint in the dough. but it made biscuits rise when the natural yeast was dead. You ate the soapy biscuit because it was vastly superior to gnawing on a leather shoe. Number 14. Parched corn. Firewood was scarce on the open plains. When there was no fuel to boil a pot, pioneers relied on parched corn. Whole, dried kernels of field corn were roasted in a dry skillet until they swelled and cracked. Men walking the oxen would keep a pocket full of this hard roasted grain, chewing on it for hours to extract the slow-burning carbohydrates as they marched through the choking dust. Number 13. Dried apple half-moon pies. Barrels of dried apple rings were essential cargo. To make them edible, they had to be soaked for hours until they plumped back up, then folded into half-moon shapes of heavy lard dough and fried. It was a massive labor of love by the women of the wagon train, served only on Sundays or when morale dropped so dangerously low that the men actually considered turning the wagons around. Number 12. Bone marrow broth. A pioneer hunter rarely brought down a whole buffalo himself, but he would frequently find the skeletal remains of a wolf kill. With zero waste in mind, they would harvest the massive bleached leg bones, crack them open with a heavy iron mallet, and boil the deep, rich marrow inside. This thick, greasy broth coated their throats and provided an incredible injection of pure fat and collagen. Modern diet trends have demonized fat, trimming it away and replacing it with artificial stabilizers to keep us thin and sedate. In the 1800s, fat was the supreme currency of human endurance. A lean diet on the trail meant rapid starvation, a horrific condition they called rabbit starvation, where your body consumed its own muscle despite eating protein. They did not fear the grease. They drank it from the pan, knowing every single drop bought them another day of life. Number 11. Bacon gravy. When the meat rations dwindled, bacon was treated as a flavoring agent rather than a main course. A single slice of fatty bacon was fried until black. Then flour was frantically whisked into the smoking grease until it browned, followed by a heavy splash of water or milk if they possessed a milking cow. Poured over dry bread, it was the ultimate poor man's calorie bomb, turning a few pennies of ingredients into a gut-filling dinner. Number 10. Snapping turtle stew. River crossings were the most terrifying parts of the journey, but they also offered a rare chance for opportunistic protein. Massive snapping turtles were dragged from the muddy banks, decapitated, and butchered. The tough prehistoric meat had to be boiled in a Dutch oven for an entire day to become tender, yielding a rich, dark stew that tasted like a heavy cross between beef and swamp water. Number 9. Johnny cakes. Sometimes the cast iron pans were packed deep at the bottom of a 2-ton wagon. In these moments, survival meant cooking on a hoe blade or a flat rock heated in the fire. Cornmeal, salt, and hot water were mixed into a thick paste and slapped onto the makeshift griddle. These Johnny cakes were dense, gritty, and lacked any leavening, but they could be cooked in 5 minutes and eaten with one hand while holding the reins of a stubborn mule. Number 8. Salted cod boiled in river water. The pioneers were heavily reliant on salted, preserved fish from the East Coast. Blocks of salted cod were practically indestructible. To remove the paralyzing amount of salt, the fish had to be soaked and boiled repeatedly in fresh river water before it could be safely eaten. It was stringy, pungent, and dry, but the protein density was unmatched for the weight it took up in the wagon bed. Number 7. Potato peel and bacon and soup. When supplies hit critical lows near the treacherous mountain passes, absolutely nothing was discarded. The dirty peels of aging potatoes and the moldy, tough rind of a bacon slab were thrown into an iron pot and boiled for hours. The potatoes released starches to thicken the water, and the bacon rind imparted a smoky, salty depth that defined the exact taste of desperate survival. Number 6. Corn dodgers. Distinct from Johnny cakes or ash cakes, dodgers were oval-shaped mounds of tightly packed cornmeal dough, deeply fried or baked until rock hard. They were specifically designed to be indestructible. A pioneer could throw a corn dodger into his saddlebag, ride for 3 days through torrential rain, and the dodger would still be perfectly intact, ready to be gnawed on like a bone. Look into a modern garbage can, and you will see half-eaten sandwiches, bruised fruit, and expired leftovers blindly tossed away. We have lost the profound ancient respect for the mathematics of the calorie. To the pioneers of the Oregon Trail, throwing away food was considered a sin against survival itself. Every scrap, crumb, and congealed drop of fat was saved and repurposed because the alternative was digging a shallow grave beside the wagon ruts. Number 5. Bean porridge. This was not a delicate soup. Bean porridge was cooked relentlessly until it broke down into a thick, spackle-like paste. Over days in the winter cold, it would freeze solid right inside the iron pot. Pioneers would literally chop chunks of the frozen porridge out with a hatchet, wrap them in cloth, and thaw them in a tin cup over a fire days later when they needed fuel. Number 4. Molasses and bread. When exhaustion set in so deeply that chopping wood or tending a fire was physically impossible, pioneer mothers resorted to raw, unheated sugar. Thick blackstrap molasses was poured directly over stale bread. The intense, bittersweet rush of simple carbohydrates absorbed instantly into the bloodstream, providing a violent, temporary spike of energy just to get the camp set up for the cold night. Number 3. Jerky gravy. When fresh game disappeared, dried beef jerky was the only protein left on the wagons. But you cannot feed tough leather to a teething child or a sick elder. The pioneers would place strips of hard jerky onto a rock and beat it with a hammer until it shredded into microscopic fibers. These pulverized meat fibers were then whisked into boiling fat and flour, creating a rich, meaty gravy that required absolutely no chewing. Number 2. Prairie chicken roasted over dung. The vast, treeless plains of Nebraska and Wyoming offered zero wood for cooking fires. The only fuel available was buffalo chips, which was sun-baked, dried manure. When a pioneer managed to shoot a wild prairie chicken, it was gutted, skewered on an iron ramrod, and roasted directly over the smoking, foul-smelling dung fire. The meat inevitably absorbed the bitter, grassy smoke of the burning manure, but hunger makes you blind to the smoke, and hunger forces you to strip the bones clean. Number 1. Leather and pepper stew. History books often glaze over the darkest truths of westward expansion. When the wagons broke down in the mountains, when the snow drifts reached 10 feet high, and the draft animals froze to death, all actual food vanished. In these final, desperate moments, pioneers would take the leather from their spare boots, their harnesses, or their belts. They would boil the thick rawhide for days in melted snow, adding heavy black pepper to mask the taste of tanning chemicals and dirt. They drank the gluey, collagen-rich water to keep their stomachs from collapsing inward. It was not a recipe. It was the sheer, brutal defiance of death itself.